Thank you, thank you. Let me start by recognizing the leadership of Sasco, led by the President, CAM Chair, and the Secretary General, as well as all of the officials. Let me recognize the NEC members which are here. Let me recognize all of the delegates to this very important policy conference of Sasco. Let me start by covering a few important items. Comrades, we are at the tail end of the 2025 academic year. Before we move to state of readiness for 2026, I think it's important that we have a reflection on what would have transpired during this academic year. Of course, I'm still very new to NSFAS, not just arrived, but still fairly new. We would have inherited an organization that has been characterized by a long degree of instability here. And my role primarily working with the Minister of Higher Education and Training, the NSFAS board, is to restore some semblance of stability to the organization. Now, of course, we would have faced the issue of financial exclusion created by NSFAS itself by having a huge amount of students which had blocked registrations, late registrations, applied during the incorrect cycle, all of those kind of elements. And the organization had to take steps to stabilize the sector, to reprioritize funds to the value of about 13 billion rand to ensure that every deserving student for the academic year could register. We also faced a crisis of accommodation where landlords had not been paid for a period of time. Students have been threatened with evictions, insecure living conditions. To a large extent, we have taken steps to stabilize, bring up to date payments to landlords, prevent mass evictions of students. Things are not perfect, but you will first have to stabilize an institution before you can put it on the path to reform here. A big part of what we are doing now is ensuring that all of the historical mistakes that we've made are not repeated for 2026. Now, comrades, we would have run a very long and effective application cycle. We would have received applications of about 900,000 aspiring students which seek to enter institutions of higher learning. Now, there's a couple of things that we take from the application cycle. One is that seemingly we seem to be leaving young men behind in society. Perhaps this policy conference must resolve on why 66% of applications come from young women and only 34% of applications come from young men. We face many crises in society, but if we continue to leave young men behind, we'll continue to see a crisis of economic exclusion that permeates into many forms of abuse, substance abuse and others amongst young men. So I think it's a very important question for this policy conference to confront on the low levels of applications from young men for institutions of higher learning as well as for NSFAS services. The second thing is that 99% of students, when they make applications, indicate that they want to attend university. 900,000 students, of which 850,000 all want to go to university, for which we know there are only 200,000 places for first-time entrants. Have we done enough as a progressive movement and as Sasco to encourage that people attend technical and vocational training colleges, that they see other paths through the economy? Not everybody requires a degree to be successful. And I don't know that we've done enough. I don't know that we've done enough to promote technical and vocational training colleges. And I think it's something important that you must reflect on. Now, when we come to more operational matters, NSFAS is working hard to ensure that all students receive outcomes of their funding applications by the 15th of December. That is, before they go on Christmas break, they must know what is the status of their funding with NSFAS when it comes to financial eligibility. Should they know what their financial eligibility is and should they disagree with the decision, we want to give them sufficient time to appeal before the start of the registration cycle so that we have as little issues during the registration cycle here. Yeah. For continuing students, before the end of December, all continuing students must be aware of whether they meet the progression criteria to be a continuing student of NSFAS. That means when we come back in January, students must know when the matric results are released, whether they qualify for funding from NSFAS or not. And if they do qualify from NSFAS, when institutions send offer letters between the 14th and the 15th of January, students must know where they are going so that when the registration cycle happens, we have a smooth and clear onboarding and registration cycle. It means that when NSFAS disburses first allowance payments in the first week of February, the majority of students should receive their allowance payments on time so that they are not hungry, they are not struggling when they arrive at campus, acknowledging that majority of our students come from vulnerable, marginalized, and working class backgrounds. Yeah. Now we require your support in ensuring an effective and an efficient registration cycle. NSFAS will deploy full-time capacity to all institutions of higher learning to support students and institutions in resolving queries, in assisting them with any issues that they may face, so that we have a very stable start to the 2026 academic year. Mine is to ensure students are registered on time, receive allowances on time. Now, comrades, we know that we face a crisis of student accommodation. The issue of infrastructure backlogs are not going to go away. We have to live with the fact that we do not have sufficient student accommodation in South Africa. However, where we have sufficient student accommodation, we must ensure that unscrupulous landlords, that poorly maintained university residences are not environments that should be accredited for student accommodation. That is why NSFAS is taking steps to remove all student accommodation that does not meet accreditation standards, to ensure that students, when they arrive on campus, within 24 hours must be placed in a secure student accommodation residence here. We also want to ensure that SRCs have sufficient capacity to be able to ensure that they play a role in the accreditation process, so that unscrupulous landlords are not allowed to subvert the process and students are placed in areas where they are not safe or not secure. We also rely on the student movement and students to be able to report incidences to NSFAS, so that where students are residing in unsecure accommodation, sufficient steps can be taken to address that matter here. Yeah? Now, comrades, NSFAS is also moving towards a situation where all of our services are decentralized into institutions of higher learning. We are pleased to say that we have written to all 76 institutions, of which 55 have confirmed that from 2026 onwards, they will provide NSFAS with office space to be able for us to address student queries in person. NSFAS will decentralize its services so that students can receive services in person and that they do not have to wait many months for their issues to be resolved. Now, comrades, as I move towards conclusion, there is a number of matters that I want to be able to leave you with as you navigate towards your commissions and take decisions about your policy positions for students in higher education. We know that in 2017, a very progressive decision was taken to implement, at the time, what was fee-free higher education. But we must confront the question about whether we have truly achieved education that is decommodified and decolonized for all students in South Africa. Yeah. Whether NSFAS, with all of its failures, has been able to address the question of the provision of a sustainable funding and financing mechanism for higher education in South Africa. First, let's focus on the positives. Today, 70% of NSFAS beneficiaries come from households that are dependent on SASA. That is a statistic that tells you that there is correlation between basic education policy, social policy, and higher education policy. If a student coming and residing from the poorest households in South Africa can aspire to become a medical doctor, a chartered accountant, a lawyer, a plumber, electrician, it tells you that the policies of this country are working for young people. Secondly, 60% of chief directors, DDGs, DGs in government today were funded by NSFAS. So anybody who tells you that NSFAS does not work, it is unsustainable, is not telling you the truth, because those two statistics tell you that it is an organization that is transformative in nature. However, if we consider today, you will find that out of every student that is registered for NSFAS, only 1 in 2 students will end up crossing the graduation stage here. And if we are truly to implement sustainable higher education in this country, I will put it to you, comrades, that a student which does 3 years of engineering and falls short at the 4th year, we have not done our job as higher education, we've not done our job as progressive student movement. Yes, the reality is not every single student will graduate. That is the reality of what we face. But 50% is too low of a number to create a sustainable, self-sustaining higher education system. We have to do more to address the challenges that face us in higher education. NSFAS has a role to play. NSFAS delayed payments, poor accommodation, plays a role in student wellness and lack of student graduation. But we must also confront the difficult realities that we face, which includes substance abuse, drug abuse, more recently online gambling, the culture of violence, rape, gender-based violence that is present in our campuses today, and the outcomes that is producing in terms of lack of graduation. We must also confront the difficult reality of the state supporting a student right from birth through early childhood development, basic education, social assistance, higher education. That person qualifies as a medical doctor, does their community service, and goes and practices in the United Kingdom or Australia. These are the difficult realities that we need to face in this policy conference about whether we have created a truly sustainable financing and self-sustaining higher education in South Africa. And as we confront that reality, we have to continue to focus on accessibility. But beyond accessibility, we have to focus on performance, graduation, and employment of NSFAS beneficiaries. When we look at NSFAS beneficiaries, they should be the best in society. They should rise to be in the highest levels of business, government, entrepreneurship, and international organizations. With that, comrades, let me take this opportunity to wish you the best for the remainder of your policy conference. Thank you for taking the time to accommodate me. I look forward to a stable and an effective start to the 2026 academic year.